In Investigation 1, you're going to learn about something called a number line. First, once you just draw a line on your paper, and when we think about that, I'll draw one on the board here. When we think about drawing a line, that's what we do. And actually, in mathematics, we call that a line segment. In mathematics, if we want to draw something that we really want to call a line, we put arrows on the end of that line segment. And the arrows mean that that line actually it goes on, it continues forever to the left and forever to the right. So a mathematical line is just a little bit different than what you normally think of when you think of drawing a line. When you just draw a line, you're drawing actually a line segment. You put arrows on the end of it, and in mathematics we call that a line. Now, if we put some marks called tick marks on this line and we evenly space those, and then we put some numbers on here, let's say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, now we have a number line. Now, why do we need to know about number lines? The main reason is because they're very helpful in allowing us to compare numbers. It's a great way to compare numbers, to see if one number is bigger or smaller than another one. And if you think about this, if you've ever used a ruler before, which you probably have, a ruler is like a number line on a stick, right? It's got all these little tick marks on it, and you can measure something. You can tell how long it is when you use the ruler. It's like a number line. It's the same thing. What we'll be doing in this investigation is using a number line to compare numbers. Now, I just drew a red arrow on the screen there. Can you tell what number that arrow is pointing to? Well, hopefully you can tell that's a number 6. Now look at this number line. It's a little bit different. This one, not all of the tick marks are numbered, but you should be able to recognize a pattern there. You have a 2, then a tick mark, a 6, a tick mark, a 10, a tick mark. Can you tell what that number is that that red arrow is pointing to? If you want to pause the CD, go ahead and write that number down. Well, that number would be a 12, right? That's what number that arrow is pointing to, is a 12, because those tick marks are spaced 2 apart. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So that's an important thing to understand when you see a number line. The tick marks don't have to just be 1 apart. They don't have to be like that first number line where it's 1, then 2, then 3. They could be 2 apart, they could be 5 apart, they could be 2,000 apart. Sometimes we call that the scale of the number line, how far apart those tick marks are spaced. We call that the scale. Now look at this next number line. This number line has negative numbers on it. Now, that might seem kind of weird that you have a negative number, but there is such a thing as negative numbers. You can see that 0 there in the middle, and then to the right we have a 1, a 2, a 3. To the left we would say -1, -2, and -3. Remember, we said that a number line is useful in comparing numbers, and numbers to the left, let's just use 1 as an example here. Numbers to the left of 1 are smaller than 1. So -3 is smaller than 1, we would say. 3, positive 3 to the right, that 3 to the right, that's greater than 1. Can you think of some times when you might use a negative number? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is for temperatures. Maybe you live somewhere where it's really cold and you get temperatures of -5 or -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you know the difference between the Fahrenheit and the Celsius temperature scales, you know that freezing is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's 0 degrees Celsius. Those are two different scales for temperature. So anything below 0 degrees Celsius, we would say, is below freezing, and those would be negative numbers on a thermometer. And if the temperature outside was -5 degrees Celsius, we would say that it's 5 degrees less than freezing, or 5 degrees below freezing. Now look at that last number line that I drew. Can you tell me what number that arrow is pointing to, that red arrow is pointing to? Well, that would be a negative 20, right? Those tick marks are spaced 10 apart, so we would say that that arrow is pointing to the tick mark that represents negative 20. Now we can use number lines. Those are very helpful in comparing numbers. There's other ways we can compare numbers as well. We can use a couple of symbols called a greater than and a less than symbol. Of course, we also have an equals symbol when two numbers are equal to each other. Now look at that number line where I have the number 1 circled. And let's circle the negative 2 there. Now we know that to the left, anything to the left of 1, we've already said, is less than 1. So if we wanted to use our symbols that we just wrote down, our comparison symbols, we would say that 1 is less than negative 2. Or I'm sorry, 1 is greater than negative 2. If we wanted to use a less than symbol, we could just switch that around and we would say negative 2 is less than 1. We might even want to use words to describe that, and we could just write it like I have there, putting it in quotations right now. Negative 2 is less than 1. That's another way to write that. Now, to get familiar with these symbols, I like to call them inequality symbols. Notice that the arrow always points to the smaller number. Do you see that in the first one? 1 is greater than negative 2. The arrow is pointing to the smaller number, which is negative 2. Negative 2 is less than 1. The arrow is pointing again towards the negative 2. When you use the inequality symbols, the arrow always points to the smaller number. That's a very good thing to remember, and that will help you when you're using inequality symbols. Now let's do a couple more problems. Look at these that I'm putting the box around right now. You have numbers on the left and right, and then you have that circle in the middle. I want you to put the symbol of equality or inequality that should go in there to make the correct comparison of those two numbers. For example, the first one, you're comparing 3 and 1. So hopefully you know that 3 is greater than 1, and so you would just put a greater than symbol in there. So try to do the other two. You have 2 plus 4, you're comparing that with 6. Well, 2 plus 4 equals 6, right? So you just put an equal sign in there. And then negative 2 and negative 1. Now remember, if you need to use a number line, that's what you use a number line for, is comparing numbers. Just go over to one of these number lines we already have drawn. Here's negative 2. Here's negative 1. So negative 2 is less than negative 1. It's to the left of negative 1. That means it's less than. And remember also that the arrow of the inequality symbol, it always points towards the smaller number. And that helps us know if we've written it correctly as well. So if you see some more problems like this where they ask you to compare two numbers, or maybe two sums, or two different problems, they want you to compare two numbers. Remember, if you get confused, you can always draw a number line, and that will help you recognize the order that those numbers are in and which one is bigger than the other. Okay, well that's all for investigation 1.